Hello everyone, Omar Ramos here. Thank you so much for participating in Latinos Progresando's MEX Talk series. We'll get you to our scheduled program, but I want to take this opportunity to talk about the organization that's bringing you this unique event that celebrates the history, contributions, and rich diversity of the Mexican culture in the United States. Latinos Progresando is a critical organization right here in Chicago, and so much of their work is ensuring Chicago families have access to the resources and opportunities they need to thrive. From supporting parent leadership and small business development, hosting community events that promote mental and physical wellness, and opening the doors for community members to have access to transportation and green space, LP is rooted in building on the community's strengths. LP's reach extends beyond Chicago's Southwest Side as they provide immigration legal services to thousands of families every year from 24 states in the USA and more than 45 countries around the world. But what might be one of the most exciting developments in the organization's history is on the horizon. This fall, LP begins construction on the Latinos Progresando Community Center in a building that was once a branch of the Chicago Public Library but has sat vacant for more than 10 years. They're restoring the building and returning it to its community service purpose. This project represents the future of Latinos Progresando and a major key to an equitable social and economic recovery. Building for the future is in Latinos Progresando's DNA, and it all started with just one guy trying to help people. It is my pleasure to introduce to you LP's founder and CEO, Luis Gutierrez.
Hello everyone, thank you so much for joining us. When Latinos Progresando created MEX Talks 9 years ago, we set out to create a platform that would celebrate Mexican culture and highlight everything that the Mexican community brings to our city and our country. This year's event is about history and identity. Who are we? How did we get to where we are today? Where do we go from here? Before introducing today's lineup, I want to thank our title sponsor, Constellation Brands, and all the 2021 MEX Talk sponsors. Tonight's event is a conversation exploring our identity through performance and storytelling with acclaimed interdisciplinary artist Roberto Sifuentes, moderated by dancer, community organizer, and arts administrator Sofia Gabriel de Callejo. We hope this event starts important self-reflection and conversation. Enjoy.
between artist and spectator, ultimately to dissolve borders and myths of purity in particular, whether they be specific to culture, gender, ethnicity, language, or methodology. The hope was to create a kind of conceptual laboratory, a loose association of rebel artists thinking together, crossing borders together, exchanging wild ideas and political aspirations. And what I love about claiming the badge of performance artist is that it really allows me as an artist to be a kind of trickster, a kind of chameleon, code switching and breaking free of the confines of traditional formats, crossing between disciplines freely depending on the needs of the work and the needs of what we're trying to get across to our audiences. So the first project I want to talk about is called the Crucifixion Project. Really our first collaboration, our first major collaboration with Guillermo Gomez Peña. So in early 1994, Guillermo and I crucified ourselves for 3 hours on 16 by 12-foot wooden crosses at Rodeo Beach, basically in front of San Francisco's Golden Gate Bridge. Now, this project was a tableau vivant, a living image designed for the media as a symbolic protest against the xenophobic immigration politics of then California Governor Pete Wilson. Latinos and all immigrants had been criminalized by California State Proposition 187, you may remember, which basically empowered civic agencies, your pharmacy, your local drugstore, to detain, quote unquote, suspected illegals, really those speaking in Spanish or other languages, and then to call the INS, the Immigration and Naturalization Service, now ICE, Immigration and Customs Enforcement. This piece was inspired by the biblical myth of Demas and Gestas, the two thieves who were crucified alongside Jesus Christ. You can see in the previous photo that Jesus was not present, just the two thieves. So Guillermo and I decided to dress as the two contemporary public enemies of California. Guillermo's costumed as a kind of undocumented Mexican bandito, crucified by the INS, the Immigration and Naturalization Service, and I, a kind of generic gang member that we see on the news every night, crucified by the LAPD, the Los Angeles Police Department. So we did have an audience, even though this piece was designed for the media. We had an audience of over 300 people, and we each gave them a flyer kind of explaining in more poetic terms what I'm talking about here, right? And we offered for them, we asked them to free us from our martyrdom as a gesture of political commitment. Of course, we naively thought it might take them about 45 minutes to an hour to figure out how to get us down without a ladder, but we miscalculated. They were really quite mesmerized by this melancholic scene. So it took them over 3 hours to figure out and decide to get us down. By then, Guillermo's shoulder had become completely dislocated, and I had practically passed out. But again, this piece was designed for the media and the photograph. So photographs of this event were quickly picked up, and the piece became reported as international news rather than as an art event, really, which was the point. The image appeared in many publications, among others, Cambio 16 in Spain, Der Spiegel in Germany, Reforma and La Jornada in Mexico, and various newspapers, of course, and art magazines. Ultimately, this image was a snapshot was appropriated by local vendors at the San Francisco's Fisherman's Wharf and transformed into a welcome to San Francisco postcard. The next project I want to talk about, our next major project, was titled The Temple of Confessions. From about 1994 to 1996, Guillermo and I toured a project called the Temple of Confessions. And in the temple performance installation, Guillermo and we combined the format of the pseudo-ethnographic diorama, like those found in museums of natural history, where exhibits of taxidermied animals and wax peoples are posed along with the flora and fauna that the curators determine is relevant to this culture. We combine that format with the religious diorama, like those which are often found in colonial Mexican churches. So for 3-day periods during museum hours, for about 5 to 8 hours a day, we would lock ourselves and exhibit ourselves inside of plexiglass boxes, calling ourselves holy creatures and end of the century saints. We would receive semi-private confessions of the cross-cultural sins from our audiences. There were 3 main areas of the temple: the Chapel of Desires, the Chapel of Fears, and a kind of mortuary chamber in the middle. In the Chapel of Desires, I'm on display as the pre-Columbian vato, or homeboy, a kind of holy gang member. I would engage in slow motion, ritualized actions. My arms and my face are covered with pre-Columbian tattoos. My t-shirt is riddled with holes from gunshots. I share my plexiglass box also with mythical creatures, right? With 50 hissing cockroaches. So urban Mexicans are often associated with disease, with pestilence, with infestation by the dominant culture, by the dominant media, and often referred to as cockroaches. I also, in my plexiglass box, I occupied it with a live 4-foot-long iguana named Guacamole, and a small table covered with what appear to be real weapons and drug paraphernalia. Behind me stands an elaborately festooned facade of a pre-Columbian temple made out of styrofoam, fully Hollywoodizing, mediatizing, again, this image. Opposite from me in the Chapel of Fears, Guillermo sits in a wheelchair or sometimes on a toilet, costumed as San Pocho Aslaneca, a hyper-exoticized curio shop shaman for spiritual tourists. Dozens of tourist souvenirs and tribal talisman hang from his Tex-Mex Aztec outfit. And he also shares his plexiglass box with another mythical creature with about 100 live crickets, always chirping throughout the performance, a taxidermied chicken, tribal musical instruments, and a table filled with, again, what look like witchcraft artifacts. In the middle gallery, visitors encounter an enigmatic vignette. A 6-foot-tall cigar shop Indian and a mannequin wrapped in leopard skin mourn the contents of a body bag stamped with the INS logo. Velvet paintings depicting other hybrid saints hang on the red and black walls, leading to the living santos. So you can see just an example of some of these paintings, which were actually commissioned by us with actual Tijuana velvet artists who normally make their money making paintings of, Marilyn Monroe or Elvis Presley, but they got a kick out of contributing to these wild conceptual projects. So previously you saw the transvestite Pachuco, the warrior for Gringos Troika. Here you have La Neo Primitiva, and finally the Aztec from East LA. So how does it function, right? So those visitors who wish to confess their intercultural fears and desires to the living saints have 3 options. They can either confess into the microphones placed on kneelers in front of the plexiglass boxes, as you can see here. Their voices are then recorded, and we alter their voices in post-production to ensure their anonymity once we gather and edit them down and play them back into the gallery in subsequent days so that the community can hear the confessions of their fellow community members. or if they're shy, they can write their confessions on a card and deposit them in an urn, or call an 800 number if they're even more shy. Again, the most revealing confessions are later edited back into the gallery soundtrack for future performances. The confessions and responses tend to be quite emotional, intimate, and revealing. The range goes from confessions of extreme violence and racism towards Mexicans and other people of color to expressions of incommensurable tenderness and solidarity with us or with the cause we are perceived to stand for, because we are actually mirrors, right? We are reflections of society. Some are filled with guilt or fear of invasion, cultural invasion, political invasion, sexual invasion, fear of violence, rape, and disease. Other confessions are fantasies about wanting to be Mexican or Indian or vice versa. Those wanting to be Anglo or Spanish or even just blonde. There are also many descriptions of real and fictitious, but those fictitious ones are equally revealing intercultural sex encounters. By the end of the third day, we leave the plexiglass boxes and are replaced by human-sized effigies. Written and phone confessions continue to be accepted. So Guillermo and I toured this piece for over 2 years to large museums and alternative spaces where the audience might encounter the work unexpectedly, such as the Corcoran Gallery of Art in Washington, D.C., and the Detroit Institute of Art. You know, people are going to the Detroit Institute of Art, of course, to see the Rivera Court. People are going to the Corcoran at the time to see the famous painting of Washington crossing the Delaware, completely not expecting to see a couple of Mexicans locked in plexiglass boxes, asking for them to give their intercultural confessions. Also, populist festivals and locales such as the Three Rivers Arts Festival in Pittsburgh, or even a historic desacralized convent in Mexico City, X Teresa, which you see here on the screen, among many others. And then eventually a techno confessional was set up on the internet to accept confessions from this new and growing community. Then, as these projects are really multivalent, right? Transcripts of the recorded, written, and phone confessions become the basis of a radio documentary. So now the piece becomes audio. Also a book, Mexican Beasts and Living Santos, which was published by Powerhouse Books in New York. And a film documentary was later created by Henry Sayer for PBS and the Annenberg Foundation series World of Art, which became part of the curriculum. So this piece really, the point of making performance is not to make just a show, but rather for it to have a long life across many disciplines. Jumping way ahead, the next piece I want to talk about is titled Mapacorpo II, Interactive Rituals for the New Millennium. In the mid-2000s, we became really interested in the search for radical spirituality that emerges out of the debris of post-9/11 Western civilization. We just went through the 20th anniversary of 9/11, and many of us have experienced that memory quite differently. La Pocha began workshopping a central image of a new work titled Mapacorpo, Interactive Rituals for the New Millennium, as a response to the invasion of Iraq and Afghanistan, and as a response to the colonized brown body. The performance installation is a poetic interactive ritual that explores the neo-colonization and decolonization through an act of political acupuncture. And it becomes a reenactment of a kind of contemporary body politic. So what happens in Mapacorpo? Pocha artist Violeta Luna's nude body lies on a surgical table covered often by the flag of the United Nations. Over her body, an acupuncturist dressed sometimes as a medic or as a high priest, as a shaman, as a curer, prepares for surgery, laying out the 40 needles. A small flag is attached to the tip of each needle, each representing a nation of the coalition forces. Other times, flags of colonized nations of Latin America, for example, when we presented this piece at the Havana Biennial in 2009, or corporate flags most recently in Pocha iterations representing the gentrification of our communities. The acupuncturist peels the UN flag from the body, working from feet to head, slowly exposing her, and then methodically inserts the 40 needles across this body now map, leaving the audience to ponder the afterimage of a colonized female body world. The audience is then invited to decolonize the Mapacorpo by carefully removing the flags with the assistance of the acupuncturist. And one by one, each flag is lifted, completing the ritual. Parallel to this, at a second station, another curator or healer ritually shaves and washes the male body, myself, as if preparing it for burial. As the ritualized washing ends, my exposed skin becomes then a canvas for the audience members to write upon my body a poetics of hope. Those who accept the invitation may also physically interact with my broken body, often offering comfort to the universal immigrant, fallen soldier, bringing tenderness and humanity to an already objectified image. Different versions of Mapacorpo have been performed in over 15 countries in many different iterations. More recently, I've been collaborating with new media and glitch experimental sound artists. Exsanguination. Responding to a hyper-mediatized colliding images and a sensory overload of global despair, I've been working on a performance in collaboration with Sifuentes and new media artist John Cates called Exsanguination since about 2017. In this performance, leeches are placed on my body to create various iconic and familiar tableaus of violence, seen and unseen in the popular media. Source material comes from popular sensationalist tabloids from Mexico and other parts of Latin America, depicting cartel violence. Autopsy drawings depicting wounds from police involved shootings. Police involved shootings of people like Michael Brown, Trayvon Martin, and many others. Leeches are placed around my neck, referencing decapitations that often happen around the US-Mexico border, or placed below my eyes in performance in reference to the painful tears shed as a result of this contemporary horror. In these performances, my bleeding body stands in for the displaced, the invisible, and the forgotten, and becomes a site for activism, penance, and reinvention. In a live performance, the immediacy of glitches and experimental soundscapes created by Cates and my bleeding body intersect on a concrete sidewalk in the form of a kind of fashion runway, stylizing the images and inviting the audience to approach, examine, photograph, and upload the imagery to all of their social media sites. Initially, the leeches were used as a tool to incite an abundant flow of blood with their strong natural anticoagulant, allowing for me to stain the concrete, to mark the ground, to mark it with memory. However, as we continue to use the leeches, the history of bloodletting, biological characteristics of the leeches, and of course, the metaphors associated with the parasitic worms have been fascinating to me and important for the further development of this performance and its iterations. And this has been my most recent work and my current research. Thank you all so much for listening, and I really look forward to hearing perhaps some questions and to engage in a dialogue with my colleague, Sofia Gabriel. Thank you very much.
series and let everyone know that, as Roberto mentioned before, if you have any question, we will have a Q&A session in a few minutes. So if you want to ask something, just write on the chat and we will be able to see it later. Roberto, thank you so much for sharing that amazing journey with us and letting us witness a piece of the examination performance. I remember hearing about it when I was your student, and just experiencing today was very moving and powerful. So thank you so much for that. To start the conversation, I just want to ask you more about the leeches. What is the story behind it, and why did you decide to use them in this piece?
Well, I mean, be careful what you wish for is sort of like a mantra of performance artists, you know. But I have a long history, as I mentioned, a bit during the piece of using mythical animals, mythical creatures as metaphors, as avatars within the work, right? An early piece of La Pocha that Guillermo and I did was called The New World Border, where we would often have hanging chickens, a bunch of hanging chickens hung by the neck, you know, referencing the fact that Mexican migrants used to be hung up until about the 1930s by the Texas Rangers and referred to as pollos, right? And so we would have these chickens hanging around space, you know, of course, in the Temple of Confessions, using the cockroaches also as a metaphor, you know. And then finally, you know, also using, you know, in very recent performances, I used a goat. And then, you know, I've been also fascinated and interested in using the leeches and the kind of symbiosis that exists between the leech. You know, when I have them on my body, I can feel them pulsing with my heart rate as they ingest my blood. So I began, you know, the way we would often make work is to test images out within pieces that already existed. And so I began to try this piece out within the context of, you know, as a metaphor for the infirm, right? Really focusing on their kind of medicinal usages. Mm-hmm. And then, but for this piece, exsanguination, I brought them back into the work to use both as elements for drawing upon my body, for marking, for layering the wounds that we as Black and brown people, as BIPOC people in this country have suffered. And to use my body as that place that replaces, that marks, that can show these scars, and also to then really acknowledge the healing qualities of these leeches and to delve more deeply into that. And of course, the lore of the leech, you know, and the kind of metaphor of how we are often, you know, how Black and brown people are often, you know, seen as feeding off of the tit of the US, right? Feeding off of the body of the US, and how absurd that is, right? So just to play with those different kinds of metaphors, and also they're quite fascinating, right? Yeah. Because that also is something that happens in performance making. You really are interested in, you become interested in something, you begin to use it out of the pure fascination. And then the reasons present themselves, like why you did it, you know. Although I must say it's a bit unpleasant. And you know, many a hotel room cleaning person must have been very upset at me the next morning, right?
Yeah. Well, thinking about the themes of this year's MEX Talks, history and identity, I was wondering if you could expand a little bit more about the meaning of the examination performance and dive into the concept.
Well, I mean, the examination performance is about the present, right? It is exactly about this present moment, particularly with the use of new media and the inclusion of new media artist John Cates. Mm-hmm. You know, audiences are really a significant part of the performance, is that the audience is invited to get very close, to really examine the leeches upon my body, and to, you know, we offer them magnifying glasses, they can use their telephones, and we completely invite them to upload all of this imagery to the internet because we are commenting on and the sensationalism of blood and violence, right? Particularly the blood on the brown and black body, as well as, the kind of lore and fascination and kind of, internet porn of this kind of imagery. So, I mean, these are the purposes. The purpose is not to really provide meaning, but to pose these questions, like why are we so fascinated? And how does that really impact our perception and our care, for others?
To open a conversation about it.
Exactly. And I think really that's kind of one of the points of performance making is precisely to problematize those questions, to open spaces, to create spaces for free discourse, rather than to propose solutions. Right?
We were having a conversation before about the research that you've been doing for this project and how you've been having opportunities to expand it. Can you tell me a little bit about that?
Yeah, it's really been amazing doing this project. I was invited to become a Smithsonian Artist Research Fellow, working with Josh Franco and the Smithsonian Museum, the Archives of American Art. And Josh hooked me up with Anna Phillips, who is like the preeminent leech and invertebrate scientist at the Museum of Natural History. And so we have been in conversation for the last couple of years. And most recently, my partner, who was also a collaborator in this piece, Roberto Sifuentes, had the incredible opportunity, I was so jealous, to go to Washington, D.C. with Anna Phillips and Josh and to wade through the swamps of Maryland and go leech hunting, looking for new species and different species. Originally, we were going to do that as part of a TV show for the Smithsonian Channel, but because of COVID, that didn't happen. So eventually, this is going to be probably just in the next few months come out as a podcast on this Smithsonian podcast called Side Door, which will feature audio from the hunt and also interviews with me regarding the performance and the research that I did with the Smithsonian.
That's amazing. Well, thank you so much. I'm waiting a little bit to receive the questions from the audience. I hope people can keep asking us things to keep this conversation going. I just want to ask you, how are you feeling? I feel
I'm feeling quite leaky. I am leaking tremendously. And unfortunately, because they have such a strong anticoagulant, these wounds may bleed as such for many hours into the night tonight.
Yeah. It's going to be a long night for you.
It's going to be a long night.
And where do you imagine this project going? Do you want to keep working with the leeches? I know you can become very fascinated about it.
Really the collaborations, the way we work in performance, the way I've been working in performance is that they have a long life, right? That they become many kinds of things. Like now this piece was a live performance, then is now an audio piece again for radio, for podcast format. Also in collaboration with my partner, Adam Han, who is also a textile artist, a political artist. She has been creating, you may have noticed while I was giving a talk, this incredible textile that the leeches were placed upon, which is a design of leeches onto this looking like a bandana, right? Looking like the paisley of a bandana, but really designed as leeches. So she's been doing a lot of kinds of textile art and creating also different kinds of textiles with imagery relevant to the piece for me to use to pat myself down as I'm doing now with just a cloth. So, and of course to tour in various ways. We've done, this kind of iteration. We collaborated with, because we work with John Cates, who's a glitch artist, we were invited also to a glitch festival to perform this, simultaneously in the US, Singapore, and Mexico, among a number of different artists. So this piece really can exist in very different contexts, right? As an analog piece, as a live performance piece, as a
as a broadcasted piece of work. But I'm really looking for what might be the form. I don't know if the full form will be performed again, but possibly, but something new will come out of it. And also I have to, like, my tolerance for the leeches, like after doing them, I have to wait a little while before I get ready to do it again.
Sure. So someone has a very interesting question on the from the audience. They're asking about the audience reactions, especially when you're performing in institutions. Can you tell me anything about that?
Yes, I mean, it varies for the pieces. For this piece, for the exsanguination piece in particular, was really interesting. One iteration we performed at Defibrillator Gallery with Joseph Ravens, hosted by Joseph Ravens here in Chicago. I did this piece, and at the beginning of the piece, I would run around the concrete runway a little bit just to mark the space ceremonially.
Mm-hmm.
And in one of the turns before I began the work, I ruptured my Achilles tendon. And so I'm standing there in front of an audience of 300 to 500 people, wondering what I should do next. Should I continue to perform or not? And, I went on with the performance with limited mobility. But what I realized, and at a certain point, I just had to lie down. And then I just said, let's just put the leeches all over my body and just see what happens from here. And I'll just become a still image at this point, right, for the audience. But the interesting thing was my own presence was very intimidating for the audiences. So no one was coming near me whatsoever, right? They didn't want to come near a standing, full, strong, round person, right? Even before the leeches were on my body. So much distance. As soon as I lay down passively, everybody felt free to treat my body as an object, right? Ran up with their phones, got really close, people would touch me, no problem at all. I thought that was a really interesting thing. But depending on where this piece is performed, and the others, it's perceived very differently,
And that changes the piece in a way, no?
Yeah, I mean, it alters the work. Context always alters performance work, which I think is really a wonderful thing. I was talking about the chickens, for example, have a very direct meaning for Latinos, but when we performed that kind of work in the South, African Americans would come up and say, hey, this really meant a lot to me because we used to be hung for stealing chickens, and so context is quite important.
Yeah, for sure. Someone is asking about the leeches as a healing tool. So have you experienced other medicinal practices in your work?
Well, aside from the acupuncture.
Yeah, exactly.
Right. The acupuncture certainly we use as a kind of medicinal practice. We always would contract actual acupuncturists, right? And they would always have sessions and see what's going on with the artist. But really, we use them for the image, right? So coincidentally, I receive healing benefits, and as part of the research outside of performance, we receive, we use them for healing in our own home now, having these leeches living, on the counter near the kitchen for so many years. But in performance, it's really about what is the image that we're creating and what is the metaphor and the conversation that's happening with the audience and this mythical being and the performer.
You mentioned, yeah, for sure. You mentioned before the ritualistic aspect of performance, and I'm wondering, how is the experience for you? Is there like a sort of catharsis when you're performing? Like, what's the ritual aspect of this piece, for example?
I think, again, as a performance artist, this is a coincidental thing that may happen, right? I'm not performing for my catharsis. I don't want to perform my catharsis for people. I'm also, in all of this work, we are not representing any reality, right? These are not real beings, right? They are part of the imaginary, the popular imaginary. And so, my catharsis may be incidental. I personally, as a person and performer, I do performance because I want to be in the same room with people. I want to make work in conversation with people in the same room with me that breathe the same air. And I feel that it has a tremendous power of community, right? And so that's really important to me. And I feel like performance is a place where I can really scream, right? Where I can do things that I can't get away with on the street, in my institution, or anywhere else. And that's why I make this kind of work, right? But I certainly am not performing my catharsis for audiences.
Yeah, for sure.
Because that happens in performance and in other kinds of work, right? And that is also, fine, but problematic. I think, fetishized, let's say.
Yeah, for sure. Someone is asking about the symbiosis part of being using the leeches and being Mexican. They're asking, could you speak more about the symbiosis part of your work?
Well, I mean, that is something that I feel. I mean, that I feel in my body with the actual leeches on my body. I do think that in this performance, the leeches really become the sort of main entity, and the way they move and breathe reverberates through the audiences. That's the sensation that I've had. That the audiences become very small, careful, tender, witnessing this, that we breathe together. And it's amazing that these creatures can bring that out in a crowd of, a few hundred people, that all of a sudden the people are with this one being, which is attached to my body, my heart rate, my rhythms. And then they leave and I feel it.
How do you discuss your work with family? People are asking.
Well, I was talking with my mother just the other day, and she was recalling a great moment when we performed a very extensive rave-like performance in San Francisco. And both my grandparents came up from Los Angeles to witness it. My grandmother in a gold lame kind of flapper outfit, and my grandfather in a suit, my grandmother in a wine. And I was on stage doing all sorts of things. And my grandmother would just talk to me as though I wasn't doing anything, right? As though I wasn't performing. And then she was more interested in seeing the naked performers. So she would go look at the naked guys. Yeah. My mother has been, I think, probably like one of the most beautiful moments for me was the first time we performed the Temple of Confessions, which was also kind of my first big museum show, right? And I was just amazed. I was sitting there setting up the show, and I didn't really understand the gravity of it. And all of a sudden I saw this vinyl lettering going on the wall. I didn't really understand what that meant until I saw my name and vinyl lettering on the museum wall. And I got on the phone, this was in Arizona. I got on the phone, I called my mom and dad. I said, Mom, Dad, you have to come see this. This is bigger than I thought, because I didn't go to art school or anything. So I wasn't used to that. And I was performing, and my parents arrived, and my mother and father came around the corner to the gallery and saw me in the plexiglass box, seemingly in this kind of distress. And simultaneously, my mother burst into tears and ran out, and my father burst into laughter and ran out. And that's pretty much how it's been with my family. They're still waiting for me to be famous and get on TV. Hi, my cousins, I'm on YouTube.
You're in TV now,
Yeah,
so that's great. Well, thank you so much for this amazing conversation. That I talk with you, I learned so much, and it's been wonderful. Thank you so much, everyone, for watching. Thank you for your questions, and thank you again to Latinos Progresando for this amazing space.
Thank you, Gabriel.
Thank you.
Thank you.
That concludes our program. Thank you so much to our title sponsor, Constellation Brands, and to all of our sponsors, but especially to you at home for being here. To learn more about other events in the MEX Talk series, go to www.latinospro.org/MEX Talks. You can also watch past MEX Talks videos on the Latinos Progresando's YouTube channel. To support LP and the amazing work that they do for our community, you can make a donation at latinospro.org/donate. You can even sign up for a monthly pledge. Make sure you're following Latinos Progresando at Latinos Pro on Facebook, Instagram, LinkedIn, and Twitter to always have the latest. Muchas gracias. Thank you.